If you had to pick one man in the world who does not have a great reputation for bringing peace to the Middle East, it would have to be Tony Blair.
Donald Trump believes it, and Jared Kushner believes it, and he has got the Gulf nations on board. So you've got to this point where you've got nearly everyone agreeing to it. But, if you're Hamas, what do you get out of it?
But it seems to be pretty darn obvious that in a normal world, it would not be Tony Blair that was at the centre of a Middle Eastern peace process.
It's John.
It's Emily.
And as things stand, we're waiting for Hamas to pronounce on whether they're going to accept this 20-point plan that was unveiled at the White House that involved Tony Blair and Steve Witkoff and Donald Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner in drafting this proposal, which has got the support of the Gulf Arab nations and has got the support of the Turks. And there is considerable pressure being applied to Hamas to accept this peace deal, which will see an immediate cessation of the war, the return of all the remaining living hostages and the bodies of those that Hamas still have to Israel, and then the dismantling, essentially, of Hamas to a kind of organisation that will take over the running of the Gaza Strip, totally devoid of Hamas. It is, in essence, demanding Hamas's surrender.
Yeah, and I guess this goes back about a month or so ago when there was that big meeting, Jared Kushner and Tony Blair in the White House. Do you remember there were all these sort of questions about what had come of it and why was Tony Blair there and was he part of it? Was he central to it? Did he have a role in all that? And just on Monday, we finally got the beginning of the answer to that when Trump unveiled that the White House had convinced the Israeli Prime Minister to accept a plan to end this offensive in Gaza, the appalling offensive that's been going on way too long in Gaza. And this comes at the end of a week, the UN General Assembly, which saw Netanyahu try and address delegates in the UN and see that most of the people in the audience turned their backs on him. They walked out as he was speaking. And I don't know whether this has sort of brought things to a head that Trump has decided he just needs to get on with it. So essentially, he's got Witkoff, who is the real estate mogul that now works as the peace envoy. He sort of flits between Russia and Ukraine not really doing anything, and then sort of Israel and Palestine not really doing anything. But they've got to a point now where they think there is some kind of framework, and Witkoff has been trying to nail down the details, and Jared Kushner has been going out and meeting with Arab leaders. They've understood that what they really need to do is bring in Arab states in the wider region along with Israel. But, as you say, we don't know what Hamas is going to do. What they've indicated so far is that they are likely to reject the peace plan because they say it serves Israel's interest. The sticking point for them is this demand that they give up all the hostages in one go, which they think then gives them no more bargaining chips.
And the point is that Hamas has been completely kept out of this. So it's like, the obvious parallel is to draw a parallel with what happened in Northern Ireland and say, right, we're going to have a peace deal and bring peace to Northern Ireland, but we're not going to talk to the Republicans about it. And some are saying, well, that's what you've done here in the Middle East context by not talking to Hamas, which do control the levers of power that are left in Gaza, and they have been ruling over Gaza. It's interesting that the Palestinian Authority have signed up to it because, of course, that would put them back into Gaza from where they were kicked out when Hamas took control. I think the interesting thing is you talk about the sort of relationship between Trump and Netanyahu and Witkoff and going off to talk to Putin as well. I think there's a real parallel between the way that Putin plays Trump and the way that Netanyahu plays Trump.
Very well.
Very, very well. So Putin looks like he's agreeing, he's nodding his head, he's saying all the right things, and then he goes out and bombs the hell out of Ukraine that night. As soon as he's out
the door.
And what Netanyahu has arguably achieved with this plan is to make it a plan that is entirely in Israel's favour, that doesn't compel IDF forces to leave immediately, but when Israel sees fit. So there's enormous wiggle room there. And the key point is that Trump has said, Hamas, you accept this, or I give Netanyahu carte blanche to do what the hell he likes in Gaza. I bet you Netanyahu knew all along there was no way Hamas was going to accept this. So Netanyahu carries on with his destruction of Hamas, but also the destruction of the Gaza Strip.
There is no way that Trump will ever cross Netanyahu. There is no way he will ever upset Netanyahu, because Trump's base, and I mean by that the religious base that shouldn't even really be sort of big MAGA fans, are so committed to the ideal, not just the idea, but the ideal of Israel, that they are backing Trump with their support and with their money, that he simply cannot anger those people by going against any incarnation of Israel that the rest of the world may be feeling.
I mean, the one thing though that of course that Trump did do was force Netanyahu to get on the phone to the Qataris and apologise and say, I'm really sorry we sent those missiles to try and take out the Hamas.
He's got that £400 million jet coming his way.
So, and the White House releases a photo of Netanyahu on the phone. Yeah. I'm really sorry, I've been very naughty. I will not do. I'll write 100 times, I must not bomb Qatar again.
Yeah, which I guess brings us on to the question of Tony Blair, which I think for many of our listeners will be the most curious part of this whole project, jigsaw, whatever. Blair has been working on his own vision for a post-war Gaza for many months, maybe a year. And the reporting is that he tried to get this through Biden. Biden wasn't particularly interested, but he gets on better with Trump. He gets on well with Jared Kushner. And so suddenly he was sort of back at the White House, maybe once again sort of being seen as a player. And the idea is that Gaza would be run by an international trusteeship. So, in other words, they would kind of use business contacts with the Gulf leaders. They'd kind of have this, the whole point of the Abraham Accords was trying to find an economic way of bringing Israel and Arab states close together through trade, and saying that's the way we get peace. And similarly, this is, the Peace to Prosperity Plan, which is now hopefully, or he says, being applied to the Palestinians. And I guess that is where it becomes a little bit harder to swallow, because if you had to pick one man in the world who does not have a great reputation for bringing peace to the Middle East, it would have to be Tony Blair. Now, I think of all the things that you can say Blair did well in his time as Prime Minister. He gets a tick for Sure Start. He gets a tick for education. He gets a tick for the economy. He gets a tick for trying to bring Britain into the, 21st century. But Iraq, the biggest stain on his entire legacy. And I don't think you have to be a psychotherapist to work out this is, as much as anything, about Blair's legacy. That the stain of Iraq on his legacy is somewhere in his perhaps deep subconscious, or maybe much close to the surface, what is spurring him on to say, please let me be remembered for bringing peace to Palestine and Israel, rather than everything that happened in Iraq. I mean, you can hear it from Suzie Orbach rather than me on the psychiatrist's couch, but it seems to be pretty darn obvious that in a normal world, it would not be Tony Blair that was at the centre of a Middle Eastern peace process.
Look, Tony Blair is a phenomenal politician, one of the most gifted politicians of our age. But you're absolutely right that, if you buy into the theory that a politician is only remembered for one thing, Thatcher, maybe it would be the miners' strike or the Falklands War. Bill Clinton, maybe it's Monica Lewinsky, even though he was 2 terms president. What would Tony Blair be remembered for? Possibly the Iraq War. And ever since he stopped being Prime Minister, he has maintained this interest in the Middle East. And he, for years he toiled. I went and did a film with him in 2010 or 2011, and I saw the BBC using the footage a couple of nights ago. I went and did a film with him in the West Bank and Gaza, of him trying to kind of bring everyone together and trying to get the stars to align so that you could get a peace deal.
Wait,
so he was the representative.
When was this?
So this was when Blair was the chair of the Quartet Group, which was this funny body, which was the UN, the EU, Russia and the US. And he was the representative, living in Jerusalem, living in the American colony hotel, more or less, in East Jerusalem, and going out and trying to meet Arab leaders, and and that was also about economic regeneration. So, and Blair has also maintained close relationships with the Gulf nations for a long time, and sees this as the way that they apply pressure, and that will bring peace to the Middle East. So, I think Blair it's not just 2003 and the invasion of Iraq and its appalling aftermath. I think he has had a long-term commitment to this. And the amazing thing is his durability and, I mean, maybe his sort of messianic sense of self, that he thinks he can do this. And Donald Trump believes it, and Jared Kushner believes it, and he has got the Gulf nations on board. So you've got to this point where you've got nearly everyone agreeing to it. But, if you're Hamas, what do you get out of it?
I also want to know what our own government now made of this, because...
That's a fascinating one.
Right? Because, I mean, up to this point, we also heard that there was a movement by the UK and France to try and initiate some kind of peace project. You've got the UK and France and others having just recognised Palestine, right? We can now, as a country, call it Palestine rather than, the occupied territories or the Palestinian territories or the Palestinians living in Gaza or whatever. We are now, as a country, recognising Palestine. And yet this whole initiative centred from and around Netanyahu and the White House will have come, I think, as quite a surprise to Macron, to, Carney, to Starmer, to the people who've actually just gone out of their way to say, right, this is about sanctioning Israel, first and foremost. We do not like what we have seen. We do not like the behaviour that we have seen and lived through for the past 18 months.
Look, I thought it was kind of interesting, and maybe this is a micro point and is not worthy of kind of raising, but yesterday in his speech, Starmer said, we support the plan for peace in Gaza. He didn't mention Tony Blair anywhere in this. And I remember speaking to a Foreign Office official when it first came out, as you were saying, Emily, a month or so ago, when Blair was sort of washes up in the White House, and them saying we didn't know a bloody thing about it. So there you have Tony Blair sort of seemingly kind of, I don't know, freelancing is not the right word, but, working with Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff and Trump over this. And the British National Security Advisor is Jonathan Powell, who was Tony Blair's chief of staff when he was Prime Minister. Yeah. And I tell you what I did know, though, on Monday morning, when people were saying, is this just another meeting of Trump and Netanyahu with no significance to it? I met someone from Downing Street for breakfast, and they said, no, this is going to be big. This is going to be a big announcement. There is a huge amount of weight behind it. So I think that a lot of the nations that were kind of stakeholders or involved in this had been brought in. They must have been brought in over the weekend to be told, look, this is big. It's going to unfold today. They're going to unveil this plan, and we've got an awful lot of backing for it. And it's, so you've got the position of Tony Blair, but you've also got the position of the Gulf nations and Turkey about how much pressure they're applying on Hamas. I just sense this incredible weariness with the ghastliness of Gaza, that everyone recognises that there can be no future for Hamas, and trying to convince Hamas to get the hell out of the way. But why would Hamas do it?
OK, well, one of the most incisive bits of reporting actually comes from Bloomberg on this, where they report that a cabinet minister has warned that having Blair's involvement in the Palestine plan was risky for the government, comparing it to the politically charged appointment of fellow New Labour grandee Peter Mandelson as US ambassador. Similarly required overlooking ethical questions in the hope of steering Trump's foreign policy towards a position that was more favourable than Britain. And it's not just what he did in Iraq. It's not just how little oversight that action had when it was taken back in 2003. It's also about questions of money and business interests and commercial interests, which we know is water off a duck's back for Trump, but actually isn't at the moment for our politicians, for the,
it's totally different though, isn't it? Well, it's totally different because
but you're sitting there in cabinet going, why on earth are we about to wave this through? Why on earth?
But it's nothing to do with the British cabinet. There is no British cabinet involvement in Tony Blair playing a role in Gaza. This is Tony Blair utterly
Well,
independently.
at some point, Starmer's got to work out what his response is, So didn't mention Blair in his statement on Monday, talked about the peace plan, endorses that. I mean, maybe you're right. Maybe we've just got to a place where it's like, just somebody do something. Like, just do it. Just stop starving Palestinians and we can work backwards from there. Maybe that is the only thing that they care about. But I don't think it is uncomplicated for Starmer right now.
Oh, I think it is. I think that the thing with Peter Mandelson was that was Keir Starmer's appointment, his direct appointment of Peter Mandelson to be our ambassador in Washington, and it happening too quickly, too soon, on bad advice, and it's blown up. With Tony Blair has nothing to do with Keir Starmer anymore. He's not. If there was a scandal that emerged over money and I don't know whatever, hard to imagine. Well, Tony Blair has been out of office he's nothing to do with Keir Starmer now. So I don't think that it may reflect badly on Britain. It wouldn't reflect badly. Keir Starmer has no political capital invested in Tony Blair.
In a moment, we're going to be hearing from the Australian playwright Suzie Miller. Her latest film, her latest play is called Inter alia. It stars Rosamund Pike as a judge whose son is accused of sexual assault. And it's how that conundrum, that ethical morality dilemma, is about to bring the whole family crashing to the ground. Well, joining us now is Suzie Miller. She's fabulous. She's a playwright who comes to writing from being a lawyer, from the legal profession. And you may have seen Inter alia, which has been at the National. If not, it's now on as a film. You can catch it in the theatres. And you may have seen Prima Facie, which is your first incarnation.
Yes.
Each time we get the two words of Latin. And these really gritty subjects where the legal profession just rubs up, crashes into real life.
Yeah.
Suzie.
That's the aim, anyway.
That is the aim.
Yeah.
And Inter alia is the story of a judge, a female judge, an alpha. I mean, she's brilliant at everything, isn't she?
She's great, yeah.
She can judge, she can cook, she can have sex in her own kitchen with her husband. And then suddenly she has a domestic crisis in her own life.
Yeah.
And it sort of hits you in the face.
I loved writing that character because aside from her domestic crisis and aside from what she has to grapple with that comes up in the play, I realised as I was writing it that I'd never myself seen before a woman juggling everything on stage. Like often they're the girlfriend or the wife, or if they've got a career, that's all they talk about. And I thought, actually, the way women really run their lives is their career, their domestic life, their home life, their relationship. Everything kind of, I guess, leans on the other. They don't sort of compartmentalise it because they can't. It's almost like there's so many urgent calls or things that need to be done in the gaps of their life while they're at work. I mean, how many women do you know that will have to dash out to Tesco's or to Waitrose while you're at work in the sort of 5-minute coffee break while everyone else is sitting around having coffee? And that
I'm just reading the Kamala Harris book where she describes getting the phone call from Joe Biden as she's in the middle of cooking pancakes for her nieces and the husband's like a million miles away.
Exactly. But I feel like, we all did it and we never thought of it as being unusual. We just thought that's what we have to get done. And then, when I was writing this character, it suddenly occurred to me that her life was so different to, I guess, the life my husband led. And he's a judge. So I was comparing it to that, thinking, well, he didn't have to do all these things while he was being a judge. He would go to work and come home. But, when I was working as a lawyer, I was the one that would get the calls during the day that there's been an accident or someone needs to come home because they're sick, or even just the things of where's my shirt. And I think that what really struck me when I wrote the play, and then when Rosamund portrayed Jessica Parks, that very first scene where she's running a trial as a judge, and she sees 8 missed calls on her phone underneath her sort of bench there. And, she realised she's got 8 missed calls from one of her children, or her child. She's only got one child. And she thinks, I better adjourn and find out what that's about. And then she does that. And, the crisis is he can't find his shirt.
Yeah.
And
he's going to a party and he needs the shirt ironed.
But the amount of women that laugh at that line made me go, oh, this is really common. Like half the audience, or probably 62% of the audience really, are all laughing because they've all had that call. Like,
and the Rosamund you mentioned is Rosamund Pike.
Rosamund Pike, who's the
is
star of the show.
Phenomenal. Yeah.
She is
and it
phenomenal,
feels
isn't it?
like essentially a one-woman show, but with two other players.
Yeah, and the two other players are her family. And I think that the reason I did it that way compared to Prima Facie was that when she's at work, she can control the narrative. She can control her court. She can tell people when to stop talking, when to start talking. She can, list the case as she needs be. But when she's at home, she can't control the narrative. She has to run with it because the narrative is lived out by her husband and her son as well as herself. And it's life, real life.
So the 8 missed calls is a moment of like such a relatable levity. I've stopped my professional life. I've put my professional life on hold because my son's lost his shirt. But the next time that happens, it's for real. And we should, let the audience in a little bit.
Sure.
It is a moment when her son is accused of rape.
Yeah.
And she has to confront this as a mother first and as a judge second.
And in between that, also, might I put in that she's also a feminist judge. So she actually has gone out of her way to look at the legal system through a feminist lens where she believes women complainants and actually tries to adjust her court so that there's no rape myths. And then suddenly as a mother, I guess you feel inclined, possibly more so, to lean on the law to help your son in a way where you're prepared to allow those myths maybe to help him. But she doesn't want to do that, so she's stuck in a very strange place.
And what did you want to show with that?
What I wanted to show were a whole range of things. But first of all, I wanted to show that woman at work and how her life is now she has all these crises that actually affect her workplace, her parenting, her relationship, and her philosophy of being a feminist. And I guess I thought if Prima Facie happened in my world or in a world of a friend of mine and they had a son that was accused of that, what does that feel like? That's a different thing because you're suddenly thinking about your child but also thinking about your politics around it. And I wanted to find how a character would respond to that scenario. And I guess it was really what was interesting to me as I interviewed 10 female judges from all over the world, but mainly in Britain and Australia. And all of them had a son. That was one of the pre-selection criteria. Well, one of them didn't, actually. And she had daughters. And it was so interesting how much this tripped them all up. This particular scenario tripped them all up as to what would you do. And some of them were like very... oh my God, I've thought of in fear of this scenario every time my son goes out and has a drink at 18. And others had thought, well, I know exactly what I'd do. I'd just maybe let the law deal with it in the way the law deals with it and keep arm's length from it. And then they'd say, well, and then in the course of the conversation, they all got quite panicky and they would text me the next day saying, I've spent the night really worried about all the possibilities of how I would react. I'm not actually sure. And I thought if they're not sure, then I don't know how the rest of the population would be sure how they'd react either because they don't even know the law. So I just wanted to really let that play out. And I guess the conversation I wanted to start was the mothers of sons, we have these boys that are born with as much sort of rambunctious, beautiful energy as you can imagine. We raise them to a point, and at a certain point in teenage years, we sort of relinquish them a bit to their peer group and to the kind of male world that will be their mentor going forward, and then realise that really there's no mentorship there for them. And so the way that they then learn about sex, about relationships, about how to deal with women as young men, they really get through porn, through the internet, through the kind of locker room banter that has casual misogyny flying around. And I thought, well, hang on, why are we not putting some protection around our boys in that phase of their life? Why is it only when they're young boys? And who are we relying on to help them in that scenario? And I thought the invitation to me was, what are the dads and the godfathers and the big brothers and the big cousins and sports teachers, what are they all doing to actually facilitate a sort of new form of masculinity that actually allows them to be contemporary men that are really able to thrive in the kind of contemporary world and to have good relationships with women and to be able to live out that new way of thinking, to understand consent, and also to be able to talk about things like rejection and heartbreak and things that are vulnerabilities, but they're no expression of weakness. They're actually an expression of kind of complexity around relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it and it actually hit me in the solar plexus, not because I've had children in that situation, but because it calls the whole way you parent into question, doesn't it? Have you helicoptered? Have you been too hands-on? Have you not been hands-on enough? Have you made them resilient? Have you made them hard-edged? Like every bit of what you might have done wrong seems to be encapsulated by the moment when it does go wrong.
I agree.
And there's also that scene which she describes feeling cut out from the football chat or the sports chat or the dad doing the stuff with the sons, which is kind of what you want. You want
a handover.
You want
to
a handover,
that world.
and you want them to have this kind of masculine role models around them. Of course you do, and then you're kind of trying to get in and you can't quite get in.
Well, I think there's two things with that, isn't there? One is that you're outside of it and you recognise that that's happening, and you recognise that that's the most common kind of way for a young man to be raised as a man, basically. But you also, I guess, you're innately trusting that the system of men around them are actually doing the work to make sure they're supported through that and they're getting the right ideas, or they're actually being interrogated about what they're watching or what they're thinking. And then in reality, we haven't put anything in place for that to occur. So even though up until about 15 women have really thought about feminism with their boys and their girls, they've actually raised boys to a certain level where they think they understand how important it is to be respectful, to be kind, to, not be a bully. And then you kind of watch them go into that man's world and you hope that you've passed the baton on and that will continue. And then you realise, oh, actually, what am I relying on?
I was thinking of this conundrum very recently in the news when we heard about the shooting of Charlie Kirk and Tyler Robinson, the alleged killer, was handed in by his dad. Yeah. And it made me think about this conundrum of what is it to be a good citizen versus a loving parent,
and what is it to be someone that's law-abiding as opposed to when it really comes to the crunch. So I mean, and
we all tell ourselves we do the right thing, and then you think, oh my God,
and what is the right thing? Like, is it the right thing as a parent? Is it the right thing as a citizen?
You've destroyed your. I mean, what we find from her actions. I mean, I won't. Spoil, but it kind of, there is no going back to the life before.
And once that phone call came in, there wasn't. But I think they thought they could actually fix it. Yeah. Like we all do. And I think there's a line in the play, well, I should know this because it's my play, where she says, I just want to administer, like plasters and Calpol, because that's the way that I used to fix things when he was little. But now it's a complex kind of emotional dilemma and legal dilemma, and there's all sorts of different narratives around it, and I don't know what to believe or how to respond. And I think, God help us if any of us as parents are in that scenario, because I think it's an awful scenario. I also think that they were pretty averagely good parents. It wasn't that they were terrible parents, but it's actually, I do think that at a certain time in our life we've realised that the internet is this extraordinary freeway of information, and we've handed that on to the next generation without fully understanding or appreciating it. And, in the days when I was young, for example, my parents would get the newspaper and we knew what the paradigm of that newspaper was. We knew that the journalist of that newspaper had a certain leaning, so you would interpret it through the lens of that newspaper. And, like the same, in Britain, what the Times kind of perspective is, the Guardian, they have different ways, and you'd read them all and put together what you thought yourself. But, my children who are young adults will read Reddit and give it the same level of, I guess, authenticity as they would something that's, like been fact-checked by a journalist. And so because we've actually started to allow influencers to be our source of information and given them the same kind of respect or the same authenticity as a journalist, we're not recognising some things are fact-checked, other things aren't. And we've actually allowed this wave of information that all has the same level of value to be out there, to be allowed to be read and digested in sort of rhetoric manners without ever having conversations with our kids about what they're reading and what they think. And I think it's a shock to parents if they actually sat down and said, well, if you read that, what do you know about the person that wrote it? And they won't know anything.
So, Suzie, I think, some of the kind of comparison of Inter alia has been to adolescence.
Yes,
Jack,
yes.
Thorne, Netflix drama.
Which was brilliant and utterly compelling.
And,
yes.
I guess he touched on some of the stuff you're talking about there, which is what we don't know about our children. And, he's had to sort of face questions of like, what should happen? Should there be no phones? Should we, not have phones in schools, or the rest of it? If there was a takeaway from this? And
Yeah.
there doesn't have to be.
I
But
mean, I think
is there
there
a
is.
message for change, or is it just
I mean,
like
for me, it's no. For me, it's this. It's like, we have to wake up a bit as parents and realise that our job doesn't finish when they're 14, just because they're sort of moving away. That you still have to have the difficult conversations with young men, and you have to have it.
Do you do that with yours?
I did when he was that age. He's now 26, so he's now a young man that's out there.
But is that done now, or do you think you still have to have it when they're 26
I
or 30?
mean, I would hope that you still have a communication going forward. And I mean, I try to, obviously, but I'm no perfect parent by any stretch of the imagination. Just ask my children. But I think, what it is about communication. And why are we so scared to talk to our kids about sex? I mean, 99% of people on the planet have sex or have had sex. And I think, why are we not preparing them for relationships and sexual relationships? And they're resorting to porn, which is supposed to be, I guess, just telling your children that porn is about entertainment. It's not about education. It's not how you learn about how to be a sexual person. There's other ways. And actually, you don't have to know everything when you embark on a sexual
do you feel
friendship.
you can ask your own son about his sex life or his girlfriends or what he's doing? I mean, do you go there?
I do go there, actually.
Do you?
I mean, not that he's delighted by it by any stretch, but, I will certainly, I try to be as kind of non-emotional about it as possible, and just saying, like, just remember when you're having sex with girls that this is really important, or young women, and like, make sure that there's this kind of protection. And he'll always go, yeah, no, I do. I'm actually the son of the woman that wrote Prima Facie. I know about these things. But having said that, I recognise it's difficult, and I think it's particularly difficult for mothers with their young boys, because they've sort of moved into a sort of masculine zone, which is why I really, my big invitation is to men to really to actually step up.
So you said that you think probably your audience is a 62% female.
I'd say probably 52%, maybe in the beginning that's 62%. But yeah, certainly it's getting
You think that men are coming to these plays?
Absolutely. I mean, the amount of men that came out of Inter Alia and said, I'm going home to walk my son around the block and have a difficult conversation. I think they recognise in Michael, the character, when he says, I don't know what to tell him. When I was in my 20s, gosh, we all just got drunk and had sex. And frankly, I'm a bit nervous about, like, I'm keeping my head down rather than, just in case someone comes out of the woodwork and says, what happened then wasn't entirely consensual. And that's very possible. So I think a lot of men are scared to talk about it.
Do you mind that people find your drama really uncomfortable? I mean, I came out and I could barely speak. I mean, I saw you
afterwards.
Right.
Yeah, I did. Oh, well,
actually, I mean, it's really upsetting.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, and I do understand that it makes people uncomfortable. But I guess I don't want to make theatre comfortable. I think it's about starting a conversation, and sometimes starting a conversation is an uncomfortable place to be. But I think that no one walks out and says, oh, well, I know the answer. They walk out and go, yep, I'm actually looking at it under the microscope now and recognising that when I was in my 20s, maybe everything that happened to me wasn't entirely above board either. But I think until we actually acknowledge that, we can't really allow ourselves to be part of the conversation with young people going forward. And, what happened was, when I was on Broadway with Prima Facie, a friend of mine was going out with a Canadian man who was a really nice man, and he said, I've watched your play and I'm really I'm stricken after watching it, because if I look back at my 20s, he was about 55. I look back at my 20s, there's every chance that someone might come up to me and say, when I had sex with you, I didn't want to have sex and I felt a bit pushed into it, or I felt that he said, I was drunk most of the time. It was at a party. We were doing whatever.
So to that, I mean, these plays sit in a slightly uncomfortable era, where we're sort of 10 years on from the Me Too movement, let's say,
exactly.
2014.
Yeah.
And now we're back into a kind of like anti-woke, anti-DI, sort of get on with it and shut up. I mean, would you say that men should, I don't know, do you think women should revisit those times of their past and say, call out the men, call out what happened, the bad behaviour, or does that get you nowhere?
I'm just saying that some of the behaviour that all of us were involved in was really slippery. There's no doubt about it in light of the way we think now. But I think that in order for people to be able to talk about it, we need to be able to talk about...
But do we need an amnesty, or do we need to
Well, I don't even know if that's what it is. I think it's more like just recognising what our part in it was, to what extent we spoke out or didn't speak out, to what extent that we sort of thought that it was normal, that we normalised it, really.
If you look at where the conversation is around Jeffrey Epstein, the questions we're asking now are about who around him knew what, this sense of complicity, the sense of the times that allowed him to flourish. I mean, do you think that can be excused as it was just a thing of the 90s?
No, I think it can't be excused, and it was really extreme with Epstein. But that complicity is exactly the sort of thing that's embedded in locker rooms, in kind of sports clubs, in kind of boy zones where they might banter about women. And I think that complicity around misogyny and around obviously about other things as well that all of us partake of. But I think that, when I'm talking about specifically about men and their concepts around women, then, men that are fathers, that are big older cousins, older brothers, they know what it's like to be in a room where there's that kind of banter going on. And I guess we have to talk to our young men about the nuance of that and how you opt out of that rather than just becoming part of it and sort of, I guess, exacerbating what already exists and then allowing yourself to be on that trajectory towards a real disrespect towards women. And so how are they expected to figure out how to do that on their own? I mean, it's hard enough to step outside of the kind of gang or the group of boys that are having a laugh and say, I don't want to laugh along with that. So they don't want to be the sort of goody two-shoes that sort of says, oh, you guys, or the dampener on a joke. But we have to equip them with clever witticisms or ways of actually not partaking of it and maybe even affecting that it's not funny anymore to them, so they're not going to laugh. Rather than allowing that progression where suddenly, and I think that that's really interesting to me because they come back to their mums and they're not going to tell them what's going on in in the back room of a sports locker room, and so there's no conversation there. But they might actually have that conversation with their dad, or their dad might be able to talk to them about, when that happens, what do you do? And these are some ways that we could workshop how. They might not have the answers, but you can say this is how you can workshop maybe not partaking of it, or at least going, I'm not part of that one, I don't want to talk like that. So that it starts to become something that's not just an easy kind of joke that ends up on a trajectory towards this massive level of disrespect.
Suzie Miller, great to talk to you. Thank you. Who could possibly have guessed that if you take a weekend Fox News host and put him in charge of the Department of War, you end up with an abysmal rant about fat generals. That is Pete Hegseth. He's just called back 800 of the top brass from their postings in the field of war right around the globe to tell them to lose weight.
If that was the comedy, there was a darker side to this meeting at the Marine headquarters in Quantico. It was Donald Trump as well saying that the military have a real and much more dangerous enemy to fight, and it's within America. On the US edition of the Newsagents, we'll be discussing what on earth this plan is. But we will be back tomorrow, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.